It was Little 500.
The Little 500.
It's Little 500.
Well, first of all, it shouldn't be called the Little Five. It should be called the Huge 500.
It's an annual bike race where teams compete, both girls and boys.
I've heard it called the greatest college weekend.
Party atmosphere, a lot of college-age kids drinking, having fun, going out at night, waking up during the day to go to the races. Your typical college behavior, except in this week it's intensified.
And the week of April 20th, 2015 will be no different. In preparation for what's billed as the largest collegiate race of its kind in the country, students from Bloomington's Indiana University will spend the week drinking, partying, celebrating the end of exams, and preparing for the race of their lives. For the girls of Gamma Phi Beta, Friday the 24th was a busy day.
We had 4 riders. Our pledge class has the app GroupMe. It's kind of like a group text, and we all write in it. And we were all going to meet up on our corner, 8th and Dunn, to walk over to the track.
At the intersection of 8th and Dunn Streets was one house sheltering 4 girls from the pledge group, including Ashley Harding and Katie Emberger. Earlier that day, as Katie was preparing to leave for the race, she received a message from Ashley about the home's front door being open.
I had received a group text with my roommates. One of them, Ashley Harding, had said that the door was open. It was ajar. So I told her that it was me.
So Katie texted the group chat back and said, I took out the recycling. I must have forgotten to close the door. And so the issue was resolved. So I kind of just went about my day. I had to finish some homework before the race, so I kind of did my homework, got ready until we left.
Katie initially thought she had resolved a non-issue, but as the 4 p.m. race drew closer, the reality was starting to set in that maybe the open door had something to do with the fact that none of the girls had seen or heard from 22-year-old Hannah Wilson, who occupied the room directly to the right of that front door.
It sounds like nobody knew where she was. What happened next?
Well, I had to be at the race that afternoon as I was a counter, but I think a bunch of our other sorority friends and sisters kind of were reaching out to everyone, calling and texting around.
At some point during the race, Katie texted me and said, I'm sorry, Ash, I lied. I didn't leave the door open. I was just wanted to avoid conflict or whatnot, and at that point, I was really worried.
After the race, the girls will know. It'll take just 9 hours to get a suspect. A suspect who was also a familiar face. From Behave Docs, this is The Stranger.
Bryan County 911.
Hi, I was just on my way to Bloomington from Indian Hill Road, at State Road 45 and Plum Creek Road.
Okay, what makes you think it's a body?
Well, I got out of my car, shocked, and looked, and it looks like a woman. Her head is covered up, and she's just laying face down on the ground, and it's a body.
Okay, and you're sure she's dead?
I didn't touch her. I just came back home and called you.
Okay, and what's your name?
Carol Bridges.
In the nearly 30 years he's been in Brown County law enforcement, Sheriff Scott Sutherland said he'd worked maybe 2 or 3 homicides.
Not too many homicides in Brown County.
That's correct.
So when he came upon Hannah's body at around 9:30 a.m., the sheriff thought this was a far larger endeavor than his office of 12 deputies could handle. He called up the Indiana State Police to take over the investigation, which will be assumed by no less than 7 detectives. Hannah Wilson was a couple of weeks out from graduating with a psychology degree when her life was cut short. She was laying face down and fully clothed. She had been wearing a blue sweater, black leggings, and black and white Converse low-top sneakers. The coroner found that she had been struck 3 or 4 times with a blunt object to the back left side of her head. The strikes were so violent that some of the significant amount of blood she lost was cast off several feet from her body on the surrounding grass. The damage so bad, the initial thought was that she had been shot, but there was no bullet and no evidence of fragments from a projectile in her head. She had bruises on several parts of her body. There were some on the back of her left hand, which the examiner said could have occurred one of 2 ways: as a defensive wound, perhaps to protect her head from the strikes, or as a result of an altercation where she hit something with her fist. The largest of the bruises were on the left cheek and left forehead. She also had one on the right side of her head, and an abrasion on the chin, and a small one on the lower lip. She had an irregular tear in her sweater in the area of one of her arms, as well as bruising on that arm, which appeared to the examiner as though she had been grabbed there. There were also bruises and abrasions on her knees, as well as some dirt on her leggings in the corresponding areas. The examiner said this likely occurred when she fell to the ground, where the attacker then stood over her and repeatedly struck her with an object he believed was a maximum of 3 feet long. Taken together, he ruled that she was likely involved in a struggle before her death, which was ruled a homicide by blunt force. Her blood alcohol level was 2 or 3 times the legal limit, meaning she could have experienced some motor function problems, some staggering, slurring of some words, and slow decision-making, the examiner said, adding there was no sign of a sexual assault.
Hannah was my firstborn daughter. Hannah was born on April 2nd, 1993. And she had a lot of varied interests, but among them were her love for roller coasters, her love to dance and to paint, and to make her friends laugh. But she really loved to lay in bed all day, snuggled up with her cat Max, watching crazy YouTube videos. That was one of her favorite days. She was looking forward to her graduation from IU. She had a path set out that she was excited to do. She had just accepted a cheer coaching position in Fishers at Fishers High School and was going to earn some money and start grad school the following fall.
The last communication Robin received from her daughter was a "Good Mac" text at 8:28 p.m. the night before. Her cat was recovering well from an illness he sustained the Sunday prior, which was when Hannah borrowed her friend's car and traveled to her mom's house to be with her pet. She left the next day, Monday the 20th, which was the last time Robin saw her. Hannah was a popular girl. Born in Kokomo, Indiana, she went to Hamilton Southeastern High School in Fishers, where she was a cheerleader for varsity basketball, and separately for Indiana Elite, an all-star cheer team in Noblesville, according to an obituary.
What kind of a girl was Hannah?
Oh, so happy, got along with everyone, friends with everyone. She was really good.
She was the person that everyone fell in love with right away. She had this contagious laugh that everyone just, gravitated to. She was just a very authentic person, a great judge of character, and just someone who people went to for advice all the time.
So popular was Hannah that when the Wilson family contacted a funeral home to make arrangements to host her celebration of life event, they said,
"We don't have a facility large enough for the scope that this funeral is going to be."
So it was hosted at Fishers High School. There was nothing resembling a murder weapon at the scene. There were shoe and tire tracks around her body, some belonging to the 911 caller, and others of varying ages, with the ground being too hard to get an impression. There was, however, an area of matted grass that investigators measured to see if they could eventually narrow down a suspect's vehicle by the width of its tires, provided they could nail down a car. Detectives then moved on to a canvass of the neighborhood, where they met Tanya Adams.
I was asleep and I woke up because my dogs were barking. I looked at the clock and it was 3:19 in the morning.
3:19?
Yes.
Is that unusual for your dogs to bark like that?
To bark like that.
Did the dogs do anything to the yard?
We have a very large Rottweiler that we have to keep on a cable connected to a very large doghouse that's very heavy. And he had pulled and pulled so hard he had dug a hole in the yard.
Tanya's testimony will play a part in mapping roughly when the attack may have occurred. In the meantime, detectives will be fixated, and for good reason, on the last piece of solid evidence at the scene: a cell phone with a red protective case laying at her feet. Astonishingly, the phone was not Hannah's.
I was walking and a gentleman pulled over and he rolled down the window and said, what's a pretty girl like you doing walking around this late?
Allison Eschbach was one of Gamma Phi Beta's 4 riders in the Little 500 race, so her schedule the night before was jam-packed. She was to head to the sorority house later that night to strategize with the team, get a cycle in, and then head out for dinner with the team and coaches. She had finished classes at around 3:20 p.m. and was heading home when one of her best friends, Hannah Wilson, hollered her name.
I heard her yell, "Hey, boo," and I turned around.
Who's boo?
Well, that was her term of endearment for people.
Allison remembers perhaps a great sense of relief on Hannah, who had just completed her very final exam and knew that she did well on it. That meant Hannah was going to graduate, and this was cause for celebration.
That was definitely a fun walk home because she was in such a better mood than she had been previous in the week when she had been studying.
Allison and Hannah met through sorority recruiting in January 2012 and became best friends thereafter. They first lived in the sorority house and then moved into the home at 513 East 8th Street in their senior year. The old home, which was on a street that was very dark at night, was converted into student apartments with a padlocked and deadbolted front door and dedicated rooms for the girls' private space. It sat on a street in close proximity to the pub scene, meaning it saw a good amount of foot traffic during Little 500 week. Allison lived in one of the upstairs rooms, while Hannah lived on the first floor, 4 steps to the right of the front door and facing the front of the house. Allison recalls Hannah telling her earlier that day that she received a text from an old friend and fling named Alex, a former busboy at a popular local bar who was coming back to town, so she had her own plans. The two split after getting home. Allison will head out almost immediately, and Hannah will meet up with some friends at around 5 p.m. and then go to a local bar called Kilroy's on Kirkwood at around 7:30 p.m. for a post-exam celebration. Hannah's fling and another guy will tag along. At 8:48 p.m., the girls will pose for a photo with Captain Morgan, Hannah wearing the same clothes she'll be found in, before leaving at around 9:30 p.m. Ashley Harding, who lived with Hannah, said some in the group went back to the home on 8th Street, but the night was still young. Hannah, her fling, and another guy were in the kitchen drinking some more in preparation to go out again. Ashley will stay the night at another friend's house.
How intoxicated at this time was Hannah Wilson?
No more than I was. She was coherent. We could talk. She could walk. So the plan was to go to a party and then go to Kilroy Sports later.
The three will take an Uber, but Brandon, who you just heard speak, will take a detour to go to another party.
Is that the last time you saw Hannah Wilson alive?
Yes, it is.
Hannah and Alex will remain in the Uber and head to the Hilton Garden Inn.
The room was under my name.
Now, did you get a chance to be alone with Hannah?
I did. We were there and we were just hanging out and talking. I believe Tyler Dunlap was there at one point, but he left. And that's how that came about.
Okay. So when you were alone with Hannah, what was her mood?
Playful, talkative. We were catching up about, I guess, what I'd been doing in the past year.
Was there some sexual intimacy between you at that time?
There was.
Another of their friends, Tyler, will come up a little later. The three will do some more drinking in the room before heading out again at just before 1 a.m. The destination? Kilroy Sports Bar.
Did Hannah appear intoxicated while you were waiting to get into sports?
Yes, she did.
Okay, and there was a wait, right? There was a line to get into sports?
Correct. There usually is.
Okay, and so what did you decide while you were waiting to get into sports?
Tyler and I talked about it, and I decided that she was too intoxicated to go into a bar and continue drinking. We decided to put her in a cab and send her home.
Okay. How did you go about getting a cab?
So we originally tried to hail an Uber, but that just as an application takes a couple minutes to find a ride. As we were waiting for the Uber to come, a cab pulled up to the outside of Kilroy Sports. A couple got out of it, and we flagged down the taxi driver and approached him about taking Hannah Wilson home.
How did you put Hannah in the taxi?
So Tyler and I think I took her waist and I helped carry her towards the taxi cab. We opened the back left door directly behind the driver, and we helped her in the car. I asked Hannah several times, I said, "What is your address?" She gave me and repeated her address to me several times. And then I verbally looked into the front and told the cab driver, "You're going to be taking her to this address."
Was that the last time you saw Hannah alive?
That was.
She was pleading with them to stay, and they were trying to get her in the cab.
Okay, did she appear intoxicated?
She was drunk, yes, sir.
Okay.
Hannah didn't want to go home, but the decision had already been made. The cab driver will be paid in cash, not card, meaning the trip will not be logged. The cab takes a right on 8th Street and drives up a short distance to Dunn Street before she gets out. He says he doesn't actually see her go inside the house, though he notes that she was coherent and could have walked home on her own. By this point, Allison was already back from dinner and cleaning up in preparation for her parents to come watch her ride the next day.
I cleaned up and did dishes for a while, and then I realized how late it was, wanted to get to bed. I'd shut off my light, locked my door around 1 o'clock, got in bed.
Meanwhile, at 1:02 a.m., Hannah makes one final call to a man named Colt, who has only known her for 2 weeks. The call lasts 1 minute and 4 seconds, but he can't hear her because he is with his buddies at the Bluebird bar. Seconds later, at 1:03 a.m., her phone connects to the home Wi-Fi. 3 minutes pass, and at 1:06 a.m., Colt texts her asking what she was saying on the phone.
Did you receive a response?
I did not.
At 1:05, I heard the front door open downstairs. I heard a few footsteps. I did not hear the door close. And I assumed that somebody was bringing friends back. And I just told myself once I could get to sleep, I knew I could stay asleep. So I turned over in bed and kind of forced myself to sleep and woke up the next day.
I don't typically get in the car with strangers, but after a short conversation, it seemed like it was all right.
Someone from the state police called you?
Yes.
And about what time?
I believe it was early afternoon. So I was told they had found a cell phone, that they had found my name in the contacts, and they asked if I knew who the cell phone belonged to.
That's Alaire Schmitz.
He asked me about a cell phone and wondered whose number the cell phone was belonging to.
And that's Jennifer Lentz, a professor at Indiana University. On the very same night the students were bar hopping, these two were taking their night a lot slower.
A group of us met on a weekly basis in a couple different bars around town. Played pub trivia.
Who was on your team?
The main players were myself, Jenny Lentz, Dan Messel, Matt Brighton.
At 5:20 p.m., just as Hannah and her friends were gearing up to go to the Kilroys on Kirkwood, Alaire receives a text from Daniel Messel to see if she was in for Thursday trivia. She confirms. The four will convene at a sports bar called Yogi's about a half-mile northwest of the Kilroys. Daniel will drop by his coworker Matthew Brighton's place at just before 8 p.m. and meet the girls there for the 9 p.m. game start. Minutes before that begins, a few blocks away, Hannah will take that photo with Captain Morgan. Roughly 2 hours of answering questions later, at just before 11:30 p.m., the four trivia nerds can be seen leaving the bar. Alaire and Jennifer will split, and Daniel will drop off Matthew at 11:30 p.m. The two had discussed staying out for a bit, but because it was a weeknight and they both had work at the same print shop the next morning, Matthew declines. The cab driver said that when he dropped off Hannah, he didn't see a car in front or behind him, suggesting that he didn't believe he was being followed. But surveillance from a bed and breakfast called The Showers on East 8th Street shows an SUV trailing the cab on the one-way street within 30 seconds at 1 a.m., with a 23-minute time correction to the one shown on screen. The SUV will make several more appearances in the eyes of the camera at 1:07 a.m., 1:31 a.m., 1:55 a.m., and 1:57 a.m. in the direction of Dunn Street, which is about 3 blocks away. The same looking SUV will be captured by a surveillance camera from a Pritchard's Auto Service Center on State Road 45 at 3:26 a.m., a few minutes from Tawny Adams' place, the woman whose dogs were barking aggressively at 3:19 a.m. This was the only vehicle observed traveling west toward Bloomington between 3 and 3:30 a.m. A few hours later, at 7 a.m., Matthew clocks in for work with his boss Joe at the shop called The Fine Print. But something isn't right. Daniel hasn't clocked in, and on payday no less. Concerned because he has never seen this behavior from Daniel, Matthew texts him at 8:20 a.m. "Hey, you make it home okay last night?" He gets no response, so he goes to Joe, who also hasn't heard from him.
Was Dan Messel a good employee?
Yes, he was.
What was his reliability?
He was pretty reliable. If he were not going to be there for one reason or another, he would either phone me or text me to let me know.
Did Dan Messel show up for work?
No, he did not.
Did you receive a call?
No, I did not.
Did this strike you as being unusual?
Yeah, it did.
Even if Daniel wanted to communicate with his boss, he wouldn't have been able to, at least conveniently. And that's simply because he lost his phone.
And were you able to answer that question?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you tell them?
I told them the phone number for the phone matched
Daniel Messel.
We had talked and agreed that he would drop me off at Eigenman, the dorm. But as we were driving, we passed 10th Street, and I told him to take a right. He refused and said, "Oh, I know a shortcut." And I reiterated the point of, I'm actually from Bloomington. I know that this is not a shortcut. Where are you going?
By the afternoon of the 24th, Indiana State Police were deep into a search of Daniel's home on Ison Road, but the suspect was a no-show. Daniel's father, who said his son would normally return from trivia at midnight, had been concerned because he hadn't seen him at all that Friday. He wasn't there when his nephew was dropped off at 6:30 a.m., and he wasn't there when police came to his door at around noon after discovering that the phone at Hannah's feet was his. Trooper Richard Clune was providing security for the search team that afternoon. He had been at the scene for about an hour and a half when his shift ended. He was heading home when, 15 to 20 minutes later, at around 5:30 p.m., he was called back by dispatch. Daniel's 2012 silver Kia Sportage had rolled into the driveway.
I arrived back at the residence. I pulled in the driveway as another trooper pulled in directly behind me. As I pulled in the driveway, I observed a Kia SUV, and that there was a male walking from the residence towards the cars that were parked outside of the residence. As soon as I pulled in the driveway, put my vehicle in park, I exited my patrol car. Noticing the male walking from the residence matched the description that I had been given. He had a plastic bag in his right hand. The first thing I did is I told him to show me his hands, and he had the plastic bag in his right hand. And after I told him to show me his hands, he took the plastic bag and he kind of just tossed it off to his right side. Now, was that an immediate response by him? No, it was not. Once I had Mr. Messel on the ground, I holstered my weapon and I placed him in handcuffs and then sat him up.
It took just 9 hours for police to secure an arrest. A cell mapping of Daniel's phone plots him at Matthew's place between 11:30 p.m. and 12 a.m., then back in downtown Bloomington at around 1 a.m., consistent with the SUV that passed East 8th Street, and, crucially, behind Hannah's cab. Between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. that Friday morning, the phone is pinging off towers north of the college town and up toward the Griffey Woods Nature Preserve, and then up in Brown County, where the phone makes tower contacts between 2:55 a.m. and 2:58 a.m. The SUV gets caught by the Pritchard's camera along State Road 45 at 3:26 a.m., and then the SUV makes a stop for fuel at a Speedway station on the north side of Walnut Street in Bloomington at 6:26 a.m. The car turns south and enters a McDonald's on the same road, where Daniel is seen entering, going straight to the restroom where he spends about 2 minutes, and then leaving. He's not wearing the IU pullover, which is somewhat unusual because it was cold that night. Hours later, at 10:26 a.m., he is spotted draining his bank account, save for $8, at the IU Credit Union at 510 East 17th Street. When he returns home that evening, the SUV becomes a focal point for investigators. Sergeant Christopher Lewis noted what he thought was possible blood spatter on the outside of the car, as well as 2 clusters of hair on the inside. The car will be towed to the police post for a closer look after a search warrant is secured. In the meantime, Sergeant Lewis will travel to Hannah's home at 7:15 p.m. for an inspection. He notes no forced entry on the front door and no sign of a struggle in her well-put-together room. Her purse, which contained her university ID, some cash, and makeup items, was on the bed, signaling she made it home earlier that morning after being dropped off by the cab. Back at the police post, Daniel is brought in and photographed. He had wounds on his left and right arms, to his legs, marks on his hands, abrasions on his forearms, and discoloration on his lip. The bag he had been carrying contained the outfit he had been wearing earlier that day and the night before: brown Skechers shoes, the red IU pullover, the Cincinnati Reds t-shirt he wore into the McDonald's, and jeans. Also inside were boxer briefs and a single sock. It wasn't always this way, but the Indiana State Crime Lab has a tier system for submissions to reduce backlog, with the maximum number of items that can be sent for testing being 20. For example, a cigarette butt found about 6 feet from Hannah at the scene, the only piece of trash found, was not sent for this reason. The thought was that it was there before she was, and tough decisions like this need to be made with a system like this. Of Daniel's 2 shoes, only the left was submitted because the visual inspection on the right showed no staining or visible substance that could be blood. The result? A positive match for Hannah's DNA. Same goes with his pullover and jeans. The SUV was marked with 220 orange stickers where the crime scene tech believed there were signs of blood spatter. There was spatter on the windshield, the hood, the exterior of the driver's door, the rear view door mirror, and the front fender. There was also blood staining on the door hinge, the hand grip of the driver's side door, the electronic control, on the steering wheel, the center console and radio area, the dashboard, and the interior side of the driver's door, all with a mix of Daniel's and Hannah's DNA. There was 1 cluster of 40 hairs in the center console and a cluster of 50 on the back passenger floorboard. A test of 19 of those hairs showed they were Hannah's. Because 90+% of the blood staining was found on the interior side of the door, it is believed that the back of Hannah's head was positioned on the interior side of that open door. As for items in the car, there was a can of Armor All cleaning wipes, a pair of binoculars under the front passenger seat, and 2 unopened condoms. Investigators didn't lift a fingerprint from the dashboard, in part because the dash had bumps and ridges on its own, so it would have been difficult to leave an impression. But it wasn't necessary. They retrieved what looked like blood from it, which was positively identified as Hannah's. There was otherwise no blood on the front passenger seat, its interior door, or in the back seat. The measurements on the tire were close to those found on the matted grass at the scene. The conclusion was that Hannah had been beaten to death near the car, with the driver's side door wide open. 49-year-old Daniel Messel's parents divorced when he was very young. His mother remarried Gerald Messel, who became his adoptive dad at 3 years old. But the relationship with his mother waned, which he said was difficult for him, and he ended up living with his father. The trivia buff graduated with an associate degree in general studies at Ball State in Muncie and started his career at Fine Print in 2007. According to his boss, he was brought in through a temp agency, worked a few weeks, and then was hired full-time in April of that year. He did bind reworking, folding, putting booklets together, and deliveries for the small company. When Matthew Brighton heard about Daniel's arrest, he called investigators and relayed that the suspect once told him about using a Maglite flashlight to defend himself. State lawyers latched onto a flashlight as the possible instrument, despite not having evidence to show for that. Daniel's counsel argued that there was insufficient evidence her client did it, and police fixation on his phone and shoddy investigative work ensured a rush to judgment. The defense pointed to the fact that police did not immediately interview the people Hannah had been around that night, despite the raunchy texts she had been receiving. They didn't do a door-to-door canvass of the block where she lived, and they compromised any DNA that could have been found on Daniel's phone by handling it without gloves. The defense also pointed to where blood and DNA were not found, not on the passenger side of the SUV, and not on one of his shoes. His clothing didn't look like they were involved in a mass bloodletting event, the defense further argued, and his right shoe was spared entirely. How is it, the defense wondered, that Daniel could be the person causing the blood spatter and the items closest to the attack are not being covered in it? That was one of several questions the defense asked the jury to consider, trying to hammer home the point that there are too many unanswered questions to convict. The state, however, rebutted by trying to recalibrate the jury's focus after being pelted with what it called several red herrings. They noted that spatter has natural voids where the blood doesn't land, and Daniel could have been kneeling with his right shoe behind him when he was murdering Hannah, to note just some of the points made. Utilizing testimony from Hannah's friends, the prosecution pointed to circumstances that, taken together, were far beyond coincidence. Daniel Messel, his phone at her feet, and her DNA, hair, and blood in his car, was a complete stranger to Hannah, with close friends noting they'd never seen him around her. In August 2016, a jury convicted him of murder, and the court sentenced him to 60 years. Without the enhancement. Because the state wasn't done there. There was one additional matter the jury had to contend with. Was Daniel Messel a habitual offender?
He grabbed my neck from the back and suggested that he put my face in his lap, suggesting that I perform oral sex. His pants were unzipped at this moment, and I bucked my head up, rejecting that. And at this point, he slammed my head against the steering wheel in the dashboard, multiple times against the dashboard. I didn't know what to do, so I jumped out of the car.
Chelsea S. had been recounting an incident that she said occurred on November 3, 2012, when, intoxicated and walking home, she was allegedly enticed into Daniel Messel's SUV and assaulted by having her head forcibly placed on his lap and then beat against the front dashboard, which state prosecutors believe is what happened to Hannah. Chelsea, who was 18 at the time, escaped by jumping out of the moving car, losing a shoe in the process. She was dressed as a witch because she was coming from a Halloween event and said she believed the man thought she was a prostitute. 3 years later, while going through the Herald Times newspaper, Chelsea said she came across a story about her attacker and the murder of Hannah Wilson.
There was a photograph of Mr. Messel, and actually subconsciously my hand was covering it as I was reading the article, and I noticed that just the scenario and the color of the car and the situation, it evoked such a reaction in me that I was seeing all these similarities and noticing that, like, why am I covering this up? And as soon as I did, started having more of a reaction. After work, I went home and decided to call the police department. I called Bloomington Police Department, who referred me to the state, who then referred me to the Brown County Prosecutor's Office. I was sweating. My heart started racing. I felt like I was screaming, but silent, like in my body. I just felt this overwhelming fear and anxiety. started shaking and went pale. The other nurses at work were wondering if everything was okay, if I was going to vomit. I did not, but I felt extremely fearful and protective and scared.
Chelsea only reported the incident 3 weeks later because she said she was feeling ashamed and embarrassed in the immediate aftermath. She was never able to pick the suspect out of a police lineup, saying she only got a side profile of him in the dark, and the case was dropped after that. It was only after she came across the news story that she thought that was the same guy. Chelsea, who was testifying outside of the presence of the jury, was just one of at least a handful of women who complained to police about being harassed, stalked, and even attacked by Daniel Messel in the summer and fall of 2012. So frequent were his alleged appearances, they gave him a nickname, the Creeper. State prosecutors tried to show that Daniel had a pattern with how he approached women, got them in his car, and assaulted them. At least one account had him being belligerent with them. 4 IU women, Chelsea E., Jacqueline, Elizabeth, and Colleen, raised their complaints to police. They alleged they saw the same type of SUV hanging around Dunn Street late at night or very early in the morning as they were heading home from the bars. Daniel would allegedly try to lure the intoxicated girls by asking for directions, before usually saying something lewd, such as wanting to see their breasts, according to court documents. These stories emerged after Bloomington PD had received a complaint on September 1, 2012, from a woman who was reporting an attempted rape to university police. During the event, she managed to get some of his DNA underneath her fingernails, but it wasn't tested because there was insufficient quantity. In December of that year, Chelsea E. called in another complaint about the same person harassing and threatening her and her friends. Daniel was questioned and detained. He consented to a search of his vehicle. Found inside was a digital camera in which Daniel can be heard asking females for directions. He was not charged for this incident. Prosecutors attempted to paint a picture of a prowler, and they believe that the binoculars found in his car at the time of Hannah's murder were used to scout his victims. According to reporting from the Indy Star, Daniel had posted on dating website sugardaddyforme.com that he was a Bloomington male looking for that special IU co-ed in the range of 18 to 40 years of age. The cuddly man, as he called himself in the bio, claimed his income was between $100,000 and $200,000, but in reality, it was $32,000. Furthermore, a device investigators pulled from Daniel's room included what prosecutors said was disturbing pornography, such as sex with drunk, passed-out girls, which was not admissible at trial. What's especially notable is that his stepfather told media that Daniel told him he knew of a Hannah from the bars before she was killed. Despite the alleged patterns, state lawyers failed to convince the judge to allow the girls to testify before the jury. The defense argued that there were several inconsistencies with some of the girls' stories as they relate to Daniel, including the color of his car and how he looked. The judge believed the connections with these cases were too tenuous, in part because we don't know how Hannah got in his car, and therefore the risk of a forbidden inference was too great for fairness. The judge therefore ruled it to be prejudicial to the case, even one as circumstantial as this one. What was accepted was Daniel Messel's extensive criminal history, with most of the charges accumulated in the 80s and 90s, and some of which the state argued generally showed a hallmark with how he dealt with his victims. Beside a felony conviction for forgery in 1988, he has 3 misdemeanor battery convictions, 2 misdemeanor convictions for resisting law enforcement, multiple probation violations, and 3 significant felony convictions for battery that will play into the habitual offender consideration. He slapped, bit, and pulled the hair of his girlfriend, leaving her with abrasions and bruises. For that, he pled guilty and was sentenced to 1 year in jail. A woman was left with a broken nose and a severe laceration to her head after Daniel punched and clubbed her with a 2x4, a blunt instrument, after she tried stopping a fight between he and her husband, who was also punched in the head and lost part of his ear. For that, he spent 3 years of an 8-year prison sentence that was adjudicated in 1996. He had to submit his DNA in the system and take anger management classes. He was released in 1999. Since then, beside a disorderly conduct charge that involved him beating a man in 2006, he has had no law enforcement contact. That he had been a productive member of society since then was one of the mitigating factors he tried to present to the judge. One other one was the fact that he was in remission from a throat cancer he was diagnosed with in 2012, which he said rendered a lengthy prison term an undue hardship. But those factors were brushed aside. 51-year-old Daniel Messa was found by a jury to be a habitual offender and was given an additional 20 years. He was sentenced to a grand total of 80 years.
I didn't kill Hannah. A fair trial would have shown that, but this was anything but a fair trial. A fair trial wasn't on the state's agenda, just a conviction. The prosecutor was allowed to speculate about any theory he dreamed up the night before without any evidence to support it. He was allowed to tie me to a fantasy murder weapon that no one's ever seen. He committed prosecutorial misconduct repeatedly, including showing the jury evidence in closing argument that was never introduced at trial. With the amount of police presence, including 2 officers sitting directly behind me, and some days it being officers who had testified in the case, that and the prosecutor wearing a gun for the jury to see during closing argument made the presumption of innocence a farce. I am sorry for the Wilson family loss, but I didn't do it. And if it was my daughter, I'd want to know what really happened and not whatever fictional nonsense Paul Suding and the prosecution came up with on any given day.
He appealed the court's admission of evidence that he once possessed a flashlight that the state posited was the murder weapon, but the court turned down the appeal on the basis that it didn't contribute to his conviction. There was simply too much independent evidence pointing to his guilt. His car following her taxi, the garbage bag with blood-stained clothing in it, the interior of his car also with her blood, DNA, and hair, and of course, the cell phone he dropped at her feet. Two months after trial, in October 2016, Daniel Messa was charged with the attempted rape of the victim in the September 2012 incident. At that time, the Indiana State Police did not run the DNA sample under her fingernails through the Indiana or FBI databases because there was an insufficient quantity of the substance for comparison at the time, according to reporting from 13WTHR. The decision not to run the DNA sample is now raising questions and could be a haunting one, the paper wrote in 2017. Daniel pleaded guilty to battery resulting in serious injury on that specific incident and got 15 years. To run concurrently with his murder conviction. Despite all of this, from the looks of it, Daniel Messa believes he is an innocent man. A convict is notified when their court records are requested in Brown County. As such, after I received them, he wrote to me. I wrote back requesting an interview, but he never answered. Bloomington appears like a hotbed for these types of stories, none more high profile than those of Hannah Wilson, and the disappearance of a 20-year-old named Lauren Spear. The IU student was last seen walking home intoxicated at 4:30 a.m. on June 3, 2011 after a night out at Kilroy Sports Bar. Since then, there have been plenty of theories, a family still seeking answers, and a whole book on the case. After Daniel's arrest, people were looking into him as a possible suspect in the Spear case. The prosecutor in the Hannah Wilson case told WRTV in 2017 that he believed Daniel Messa was involved.
Hannah was a wonderfully vibrant and empathetic soul, so full of potential to make a huge difference in people's lives and whatever she was going to do. But now she can only affect those people through her death, and she has. I'm tremendously proud of how she tried to live her life, how she went out of her way to make others feel more comfortable, but more so how she made it her goal to help you feel better about yourself. There are certain facts about the night of her death, along with the whys, hows, and what fors that will never be known. He's not going to admit this heinous crime, but given who he is and what he's done in the past, he never will. There will be no more birthday parties, weddings, no more traveling, no holiday celebrations or other family activities to share. The laughter, hugs, joys, and tears are forever gone. Nor will there be the family with 5 kids she wanted. My grandchildren to call me Poppy, like my dad before me.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me narrate this story, which is based on the primary sources and secondary sources were attributed. Special thanks to the reporters who bring light to these cases, to the staff at the records departments for their assistance, and to you guys for engaging in the subject matter. I hope you're well, you're doing acts of charity, and I'll see you next time. Good night.